Hello, welcome back everyone. So for today, I don't see anything on the agenda urgently to discuss. I think we can start with a quick status and maybe talk a bit about the new priority developments on the LMT tool. That can be part of the status as well, I guess. So it, instead of naming names this time, maybe I'll ask like who has any updates that they'd like to share. I see Karen posted the meeting notes doc in the chat.
Yeah, nothing super new, but we're continuing the socializing of the diag output, given that now it's embedded in our manufacturing tests. So I think over the next month, we hopefully will get some feedback from the users that are sort of the hardware engineers, the manufacturing test engineers, on the readability. Daniel put in, we put in actually, it was a concerted effort, some rendering for the output to pretty print the line delimited JSON. It's nothing super fancy, but that's out there, so we're probably going to get some feedback on this. Maybe the one question that comes to mind is about the visualizer that you had then, maybe to touch on, but that's the update. So I think there will be more in about a month or so when we start getting feedback on all this output.
Yeah, no worries at all. I actually spoke to one of our engineers in Taiwan, and he's going to work on porting over our visualizer to the 2.0 format. And it just kind of gives you a nice way to view steps and measurements and everything else, right? Like, it makes it pretty, right?
So here's a quick question on this topic. This is a web thing, right? This visualizer that's
It's like a
either of you have the technical.
Yeah, it's like a little command line utility, and all it does is spit out like a self-contained HTML file with all the JSON injected into it. So you don't need to have any dependencies or anything for all the point and click and all that stuff to work.
Right. I do remember now that you mentioned that. But in your case, Vincent, I think that is embedded in Fava. Am I
Yeah,
wrong?
pretty much. It's just a rendering of the JSON.
Right. So it would work if you want to embed the thing that Dan is talking about, right?
Absolutely, it would work. We just invoke that and render it that way. So that would be a good one to socialize as well.
That's what we do as well. We just take that and embed that as a file attachment in the results. It's good if you're looking at like one run in detail. It doesn't help you aggregate or anything, obviously, but for one run, it's pretty helpful.
Now, Dan,
Cool.
are you thinking of putting that in the GitHub repo or keeping that in-house?
No, I mean, it makes sense to go in the GitHub repo, right? It matches the output.
Okay. Yeah, if you want guinea pigs, just shoot it over and we can give some feedback.
Sounds good.
Do you want me to write you down with an action then?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. I'll do that. In the meantime, Igor, I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you have the slides ready for your Rust projects.
Not yet. I said a few weeks last time, so yeah. But
all right. Well, in the meeting notes it says 1 to 2 weeks, so
yeah.
I'm asking. All right, no worries. Okay. If anyone else has updates, feel free to share. In the meantime, I am gonna pass it to Satish for a moment. Satish, if you wanna explain in like a couple of minutes the priorities for the LMT tool and why we need this meeting to finalize that discussion now.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Adrian. Yeah. So here, so on my side, I think things were lagging due to the priority issues, but now I have some bandwidth and also some urgency to get LMT going because we are starting to deploy LMT across both sides, like data center and manufacturing. And we are trying to see if we can unify the output format so that we don't have to do multiple wrappers on top of each other. So in that case, so we are already running a JSON formatted output in DC, and there is a desire on the data center side to see if we can have a OCP formatted output. So there is a push from DC side as well as on the manufacturing side. We started rolling out LMT as part of manufacturing workflow. So they're also trying to write some wrappers on top, which I'm trying to avoid and say like, let's not write more wrappers. Let's try to see if we can get a formatted output so that we can just have one standard output across both data center and manufacturing. So this is just one platform, and there are more platforms onboarding, and we wanted to get this one output like standardized so that whoever is using this tool, they're just going to look at the same output across multiple workflows. So that's a long story, but yeah, the TLDR is like I need to get this one going. Like I'm looking at something like in weeks, a couple of weeks, I need to get a output formatted as OCP output standardized and formatted, and probably an LMT tool to be delivered to the manufacturing folks on our side. So that's an urgency there.
Okay, thanks, Satish, for the update. So, Hua, I sent an email, I think yesterday. Would be nice if we can schedule this call to finalize the spec as well, the spec usage and the LMT tool as soon as possible.
Right. I think we can set up another like a 1 hour session like last time, and then we can go through the. I think we were missing just last detail of hardware info, like how do we represent the link which has partners on both sides. So once we finalize that, I think everything else is already like discussed, and we just need to document it and get going. What?
Right. So 1 hour should be enough, I think, for that. And we already know the options, like with the PDF and the other
Right.
the other one with the hardware entities. Okay. My request here is just to reply to that email, and we can set something up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
trying to talk, but I think he couldn't connect his audio or something.
At double by going to acfm.org. Craig Champagne in Leesville, Louisiana.
I'm not sure who is getting the correct audio. Okay. I muted you for in case you are trying to say something, but you have some background noise there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So given that's the status where we're at right now, does anyone want to raise any points for discussion today?
I wanted to, I'm not going to put Venkat on the spot. But we had an interesting discussion around telemetry coming back. So, okay, you're nodding, Venkat. That reassures me a bit. I don't know if you wanted to bring it up now or pick it up at a different. I think the conversation is one of many to follow, and some in the past. But the gist of it is around using the OCP diag to collect telemetry versus a background telemetry service. I think it's a relevant discussion to continue. So, yeah, go over it again.
No, thanks for setting the stage, Vincent. Yeah, I was thinking that probably now might be a good topic, right? Like, especially for something like LMT tool, which is on one side, like, say, a diagnosis tool, right? But it could very well be like a time series telemetry tool, right? Like, so where do we make the distinction between like when we use measurement series or something like an open telemetry format, which may be better suited for, so Vincent was saying, like, we have to push like not kind of delta updates and stuff, right? Like, so uh, what is the kind of the thought process around that? So the distinction between using measurement series for telemetry versus like a dedicated telemetry format.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think it's the intent of how it's used. Like when we record measurement series data, we're typically taking that data either because it's like germane to the test result, like while we're running some type of stress test for analysis, or because we're feeding it into some type of system for repair analysis, right? Like if you're using like something that would be monitoring telemetry data off of your fleet in real time, like that's the inappropriate format, right? It's too big, it's too slow, it's too JSON, right? You're probably going to want to use some type of like, we can't even use Redfish for that. We have to use a different format because it's, leaner, meaner, and faster. For me, this is really all about test data and then making it portable. I don't think it's appropriate for like, in situ monitoring. I don't think that's what it's meant to do.
And is there any merit in kind of thinking of what format we should align for in situ monitoring? Right, like
It's got to be the DMTF, right? Like they're defining that format. I don't want to go and create a new format on top of what they've done. Like we're trying to align to their machine management principles because we don't want to reinvent that. The same way, like on PCIe, we're not going through and redefining any type of PCIe SIG specs, right? Like we're piggybacking on top of those. We want to do everything we can not to bifurcate the work that's going on in the DMTF.
you're talking about the CIM format, yeah, but I was kind of curious, like, that's mainly meant for out of band Redfish, right? Like for in band telemetry too. I think it's kind
It's
of
both. It's out of band or in band.
Adrian. So yeah, hands up.
Yeah, I'll add one more aspect to what Dan said. The measurements that are in the spec right now as part of the output, the semantic of that is to provide support for the decisions that the diagnostic makes. So if you say, okay, the hardware is broken for whatever reason, you specify the reason, but also you have all of this proof in terms of measurements as to what was the state of the hardware or how it got to that failure condition, right? So it doesn't like it looks like similar to telemetry, but it's not the same thing, even if it's both of them are measurements, right? They cover different use cases.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think my question, I mean, the reason I brought it up to Vincent was one in context of the test drive DAG, right? I was mentioning last time. So there is part of the collection of like smart data and stuff, which is pertinent to kind of end of test decision making, but there's also kind of monitoring for latencies, like which is almost like you're saying in situ monitoring, but it could still interrupt the test and kind of try to capture the state. So I was just going behind, like I mean, like you mentioned, measurement series is probably going to be overload for doing that kind of latency measurements, like
Well,
every second or something, right?
Well, no, actually, I think it's if you're running a test, I think it's incredibly appropriate and you should be using it, right? Would be my opinion. If you're doing something like the machine is in a serving state and you're monitoring it, that's where I would say there's probably some other format that would be more appropriate. But yeah, like if the system is under stress and you're doing that particularly to test it, then you would definitely want that in the measurement series because that's where all the analysis tools and everything else go into. One of the things that I always envisioned, is capturing this data in the format we are, it's really to drive one thing. It's to drive repairs, right? To basically get the machine back up. I think one of the other pieces of this, though, that's missing at the moment is the machine topology. Like we need to know the shape of the machine. You take the shape of the machine, you put the the test results in there, and then you can start to predict what is the root cause of badness. That's how we're using this internally, and that's what we wanted to kind of expose externally as well.
So for what it's worth, I don't think we need to duplicate anything here. Imagine if we have a system which produces these measurements. I'll call them measurements, but in this particular context, I don't mean the term as it is in the OCP TV spec. So you have the system that produces measurements of the hardware. That same system or library or some sort of interface to it could be used in both cases. So exactly as Dan says, if we're in a scenario where we are actively testing the machine, the hardware, as part of a diagnostic, then that source of measurements goes into the OCP test and validation output formatting, right? It goes into the diagnostic itself. But if it's passive monitoring while the machine is in production, basically, then there is no diagnosis. So that same source of measurements can go into a telemetry specific format with maybe a different amount of detail or different format as a whole. That's my 2 cents on this.
Interesting. Yeah. So we would ideally use the same collector even when it's kind of under stress, right? Like the source of measurements would be the same, but you're saying there's merit to pulling the data into the report of the OCP diag output as a measurement series because kind of it was stimulus response, right? Like
yeah. So the informational content remains the same, right? That's the whole point I'm making. It's just that in these 2 different scenarios, we transmute that information in different formats based on the scenario. And because this is like a private thing, we don't need to specify a format for it. So the piece of software that does that can do it in whatever way it needs to.
makes sense. Thank you. Vincent, was there anything else that you wanted to kind of bring up on this topic?
I think the conversation definitely highlights the fact that there is some guidance here that's a little bit left as an exercise to the author, right? Like somebody may very well write a diagnostic that uses that collects measurements as telemetry and counts on that as a means to collect telemetry. I think some of what we're doing with LMT and PCI crawler hint at that, whereas you may have diagnostics that are more functional tests of components. I think this is why it needs maybe a little bit more examples and references. One thing I'm not sure whether it has value is at some point providing guidance to on the spec itself. Like right now we have the spec. It's a beautiful but somewhat dry document. It's just this is the format. The how-to aspect of how to go about writing a diagnostic and what are the best practices for diagnostics, I could definitely see measurement series being elaborated on. Also, the point we're making is whether the diagnostic itself is going to go collect the measurement itself or have a driver of some kind or a collector to a telemetry service. Could be something, a point of discussion as well. So in short, yeah, I think there is value in having a more documentation on best practices for writing diagnostics, and that would be that would fit well in there. I know for me specifically in the my main area with the manufacturing space, using the diagnostic purely as telemetry could be a concern on the storage and the size of the output of the diags, just because of the scale at which we operate. That's not to say that's not valid, but I would fall more into the category of what Adrian talked about around measurements being more relevant to support the diagnosis. But that's just a, just a point in discussion. I could see both cases. Adrian?
So, for completeness sake, I don't disagree with having more guidance, and maybe we can start having this by just pushing random bits of such information into a document, and then we can format them later on in like an official publication. However, I am looking at the spec text right now, and it says measurement, a record of data collected during a test step execution. Measurements and measurement series exist to provide evidence for a particular diagnosis. So I think that's pretty non-ambiguous as it is right now in the spec. The fact that you need to get through the whole text to actually get to this bit is like an inherent thing of having a 40-page spec to begin with, right? So maybe this guidance doc is can also serve more as of an index for bits of information that are particularly salient to diagnostic writers in specific scenarios of writing those diags, because this information already exists in the spec, right?
Yeah, but the next sentence, Adrian, is this information is also commonly used for time series analysis. So we are also covering that use case.
Well, I'm gonna blame Dan for that one because he had the CPK part.
What did I get blamed for? I'm sorry, I was multitasking.
So there's a bit in the spec which says this information, as in the measurement, is also commonly used for time series analysis and example CPK studies. And Vincent is making the point that this kind of points to being telemetry data, right?
Okay, I'll take the blame for that.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that this implies that it's handled as telemetry, but I understand your argument, Vincent.
My fault. My spec is bad and I feel bad.
Not bad at all. It's actually good because it does capture the nature of what we're talking about. It can be used for both, but at some point I think it is going to come up that from a best practice, how people, if people want to use it as a telemetry formatting, they can. Nothing stops it, right? But I think it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the whole like raison d'etre, I can't think of another word for it, is that you need all this information together in this bundle, right? Like you could use any of this data like separately for a million different purposes, but this seems to be like that lowest common denominator of what you would need to determine root cause of a problem. That's sort of where we came up with this.
And it makes sense. Like if we restrict the usage of this information for the diagnostic, for repair, for whatever the diagnostic package is supposed to do, then that's the particular value of this whole thing, right? You could just as well aggregate the data from different sources, and the spec doesn't actually mandate where this data is coming from, just as a record of data collected, right?
Definitely. Hey, folks, I'm sorry. I've got to drop. I've got a conflict, but I will try to see you guys next week. See you guys.
Thanks, Dan. Bye. Okay. Does that cover what you wanted, Venkat and Vincent?
Yeah, I think so the guidance I'm seeing is like we probably use a CIM format for any telemetry collection that happens regardless of the stress phase, but we pull into the measurement series anything that's pertinent to kind of the diagnosis itself. So that way we keep it lightweight, but we also,
So given that we had this discussion and Thanks, Karen, for having captured the notes here. Would you like to take an action to start this, brain dump documents with general guidance that we can then formalize at a later date? Because you're like the closest to the actual problems that you were talking about here, right?
Sounds good. Yeah, I can take an action item there, and I'll work with Vincent and you offline to kind of formalize that before we present here.
Yeah, so once we have this document started, like this is for everyone to like just put random stuff in that you consider good guidance. Okay, cool. Anything else that we want to discuss today? Okay, so I'm looking through previous items that we had the last couple of weeks. I see the test sequence topic that we need to start the discussion on GitHub on. I see the test drive stress tool. I don't know if we need to go into that anymore. If you have anything you want to add to that, Venkat, feel free to do so.
Yeah, the only thing on test drive, I think it makes sense generally to have it GitHub first and working on the internal diff, and we should be ready to kind of push it to GitHub in, I would say, a couple of weeks.
Okay, so you're talking about the source of truth for the code and the way you're gonna handle that. Okay. So I can help you with the CI on GitHub to push to PyPy and have the whole automation for releases and all of that, and maybe linter and automated tests and stuff like that. I haven't looked at the code, but I'm assuming there are also some kind of unit tests or something that could be run.
Yeah, yet to be made, but yes, will be made with Code Compose.
Oh, okay. That was a bit of a hint as well. So. Okay. I'll give it a few more minutes if we want to discuss anything more today, because we still have like 20-ish more minutes. If nothing comes up, then I suppose we can close early.
A very loose topic. So we're welcome to cut it 5 minutes in or use more time. It came up in chatting with Karen yesterday around the value of just output of a diagnostic in the OCP format as opposed to the full executable, right, and runtime. And we were discussing, the benefits of, say, a vendor of a component, whatever it may be, sharing with us an OCP formatted output of a run, but not sharing the actual executable, right, for whatever reason, either because there's IP or, and obviously the value of reusing is poor, but the value of reviewing is decent, because you get to see the output and you can actually put it in your parser or visualizer and make sense of it. So the question a bit for this team is, what does everybody think of this? Like, does somebody sharing with us across this forum just a test output present much value? And if it does, then should we make it easier for people to report that, either through the GitHub repo in kind of like a collaborative space where this is a safe space to share your output type of model, and kind of structure this a little bit. Because I guess right now, frankly, if I have a vendor partner that's open to sharing some output with OCP, I don't know if they would know where to go and how to do it. So very open-ended question here. Adrian.
I do have a quick reply to that because it sounds to me like very similar to the other question that I think you started a couple of weeks ago, which is building an open source database of such outputs. So clearly the database has value in itself, and this outputs from vendors or whoever it is, considering that at the end of the day, the spec is like structured logging from a diagnostic. I can see how it would be useful for debugging purposes. Like there is information in it. Obviously, it's not as useful as if you were to have the diagnostic package and be able to, tamper with it in various ways to exercise the hardware. But it still has value in itself, in my opinion.
Do you think we should make it easier for people to share that and reuse the OCP diag forum then as a result, like either through a GitHub folder of shared components or shared output, or leave it to sort of ad hoc channels?
Well, if we collate this into the same topic as the database of outputs, then that is kind of the place for all of these, like regardless of the source, right? What I'm more concerned about is how we organize all of this, because it's going to be like an influx of data from various teams, various companies, various diags, and it's not clear how to like classify all of this information. I don't know, maybe some tag system or something, because you input all of the info, right? You have all of these files and logs, but then how do you actually get something out of it? Like we need some sort of indexing, some sort of searchability in this database. As to the actual location where this is placed, I don't know. I guess it could be in the main spec repo as far as I'm concerned. So like a subfolder there. It's kind of like I'm not fully convinced of that, because at the end of the day, GitHub doesn't really act like that kind of a database, like just placing in the random bits of data. This looks to be more like a need for a folder type structure or some sort of not codes repository where you push all of this data. Otherwise, all of them need to be like a commit, and they need to be merged, and there's a lot of friction to just get a login. So maybe a more specialized system. I don't think we have the resources to make a specialized system, but if there is one, then I'm happy to hear about it. Satish, you have your hand up first.
Yeah. Thanks, Odin. So I just want to step back and see like what is the problem we are trying to solve. Like if I understand the ask here is like a vendor, like whenever I approach a new vendor, and so they provide us a diagnostic tool, and we use it like as part of our integration testing or some manufacturing flow. So the ask here is to, number one, the tool should provide us a output, which is OCP TV formatted output, so that we can do our integration using our existing infrastructure. Or yeah, I'm trying to understand the exact. I did talk to Karen yesterday, but I just want to make sure my understanding is correct. So are we asking the vendors to provide this output format and store it in a like somewhere so we can review it before we start integrating it, or it's something more than that?
Yeah, just to clarify, the The problem here is the engagement we can expect from some of the vendors in sharing the code as opposed to the output, right? So the barrier of entry to share the code is substantially higher. You know, they may have a lot of friction around putting it in GitHub, etc. Whereas sharing, if they've actually hacked, anybody has hacked, like, you know, a script that outputs in the OCP format, the barrier to share that output is very low, right? Like you're not sharing code, you're just sharing output. So the question here is around the value of that alone, and how do we want to facilitate this type of sharing? Obviously, today it will be over an email to a subset of people, but is there now value to say, because there's it is in this format, it can actually be used by other parties. So we are a cross-organizational industry effort. By putting output that is compliant with OCP, we see beyond company lines. So there could be value, you know, for us to see what other companies, vendors, unless there's obviously proprietary information, what types of errors are at play here. So that the question is the barrier of entry to share the code versus just the output, and should we be facilitating the sharing of just the output?
Is it? Okay. All right, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, obviously we want the diagnostic itself. That's really the ask, right? So that it's reusable and we can actually run it and repeat the run. That's definitely the primary ask. But in reality, I do expect that vendors are going to be compliant to the output first, and we'll have to take some nudge in order to get to contribute the bits, right? The code itself.
Okay. Marcos?
So I think I foresee a successful future here where, you know, we engage with a new vendor, AM Vidtel, and they have some chip and they're using the OCP diag format for their tests, and there's diags that they provide to us and then diags that they don't because they're their internal validation, etc. diags. And in that future successful world, the ability for them to share the output of a diag in a format we all understand without them having to do something is amazing.
So
there may
as
be a
far
diag
as
I run, but
go ahead, Marcus.
so there may be a diag that I run that validates my widget's performance, and I don't have the ability to share the diag, but if I'm using the OCP diag output format, I can give you the format, and then as Vincent said, you can just put it through your existing data pipelines to get all of the value out of that data. So as a bridge to get to like in this amazing future state where, you know, everyone's using OCP diag, if I've ran, you know, my internal diag and I don't want to share the binary because it does things I don't want to share, being able to provide a tool or an example of how to turn your output into our output, so that it can be reused and you can then provide that data across all of us, right? When you're selling to Meta, when you're selling to Google, when you're selling to Microsoft, when you're selling to HP, here, we have our output format in this form, or this data in this output format. It adds value, and I think, and there's merit there.
So it seems to me that we agree on this having value, right? This collection of outputs having value. And I would say that the more openness that we have in functionality, so if we enable both public and private diags and this collection of outputs, then, you know, everything gets more traction at the end of the day, and we can get everyone aligned around the output spec. Having said that, one of the main things that is on my mind on this is what I was mentioning before, like we can collect all of these in some sort of repository somewhere. We can figure that out on the way. The question is, how do you actually search them? And how do you like index them so that you actually get something useful out of it? I can think of something like, I'm particularly interested in this hardware and this kind of testing, so maybe assign some tags or something. Not sure we have tags in the spec right now, like for searchability. Maybe we can discuss that. But I'm not aware of any system that would be immediately useful to this. So if you have any ideas, Vincent or Satish or anyone who like is interested in this, we not only need like a system to collect the data, but also retrieve it efficiently. And GitHub is likely not that place.
I struggle to see how we would extract a lot of value out of it relative to the effort required to create such a system. I am thinking in the sense of incentives, and if we are all the customer here, the incentive is on me widget vendor to make the sale and adoption process as easy as possible. So if I can't give you the data format when you need it, or the data in the format you need it when you need the data, and pushing it up to a thing, hoping that somebody's going to sometime download that data to see the performance of my widget. I don't like. It seems like I'd only need it when I'm seeking that information, and as a vendor, like I may not have an incentive to publish that data globally, but just provide it to whomever needs it at the time of evaluation. But I think if I understood Vince's question was, is there value in having the ability for that vendor to provide it in that format, and how could we facilitate that process? So I think that the database seems, I just, back to my original point, it seems like it's going to be a ton of effort, and I don't see any obvious immediate value.
So that's why I'm asking, right? Because this system of pushing and retrieving is not trivial. So if something exists already that we can use, then that would be the way to go. But this is like for the global publication of outputs, as you said. And I'm kind of trying to address the previous topic as well, which was with the database of outputs, not just the current question with providing outputs whenever you cannot provide the whole diagnostic package to run. For this particular use case, I don't see a blocker right now, because you can go to the vendor or whoever is having that private diag package and just say, okay, you can provide some outputs. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
So what I would say is to align vendors and others to provide the output, it takes time. So even if we're not certain of what we're going to do with the data, but we think that it will be useful or it could potentially be useful, we probably have to ask a little bit of time ahead of when we need it. So I think that's probably the first step in this process, if people have a feeling that it might be useful.
So I would clarify this a bit, because I think we're diverging a bit in the discussion. Vincent, is your question just about the value of having this sharing of outputs, or is it also a question of how do we make this easier? Because right now, like if I don't really see a blocker here. If someone who's executing that diag needs to share the output with someone else, some other entity, then there are different ways of doing that right now. Like the easiest one would be on email or some other sharing bit.
Yeah, no, to clarify, the question is very much as the drivers and sort of the leaders of this diagnostic initiative, this strategic initiative. We recognize there's value in sharing this output and not necessarily the runtime. And so the question I'm posing is, if we see value there, is there something that we can provide the community to better structure and leverage this value? So it is an open-ended question on it. Are we missing something in the engagement? So it's very much an engagement value proposition to our community. If they want to engage with us and share some output somehow, can we give them some direction? I think we've established there's value. I think that's now, several people have echoed that. And we've also recognized that we want the diagnostic. That's the preferred route, but there are going to be cases where, for a variety of reasons, the runtime and the diagnostic may lag. So the question I'm posing is, how do we leverage that engagement and structure ourselves so that we invite contributions, and what are we missing there? So yeah, it is very much on the how can they share with us. And I'm thinking of, as a reference, I'm thinking of things like Project Zero at Google, right? Or other vulnerability databases in the security space where you're building this more centralized visibility into hardware faults, right? Or hardware diagnostics. So that's the theme.
So I'm gonna change the topic slightly, but it is related to this still. A while ago, we were discussing about getting some vendors and ODMs on this call. Do we want to continue with that discussion? Like, does anyone want to take an action item to actually go to people and find some contacts to join here?
So I'm continuing these discussions. They're not super active, but they are happening. So just to let you know that some activity is ongoing in that space. It's just a little slow in the making. But I am involved, and I'm happy to continue being involved.
Okay, thanks, Vincent.
If we were to want to create an example on how to do this, what in our code base do you think would be the right starting point? And what I mean is, like, the idea is, I think what we're talking about is effectively I don't know if it's a parser or a translator, but turn your data into our data, right?
In our code base. So if I understand this correctly, Marcos, the implication you're making here is that the entity providing the data, be it a vendor or ODM or someone else, does not actually have their data in the OCP format.
Potentially, right? Does that line up with what Vincent was asking, or not really? Are we thinking they're using an OCP diag that they can't share the binary of, or that they're not using an OCP diag, but we'd like them to give us the data in the OCP format so we can use our existing pipeline?
Didn't you just say the same thing though? They're basically, they don't want to share the code, but they can share the output of a run that is problematic, right?
Well, one requires, like, so one is, I already wrote, I'm Intel companies selling my weird new HPUs, and I have internal diags that are already in that format. And so instead of giving you the diag, I just give you the output, but I didn't have to do any work per se. I'm already invested in the OCP world. There's the other one where I've never heard of this OCP thing. What are you talking about? It's like, well, we use this format. If you give us it in this format, we can put it through our pipelines and extract all this value out of it. So could you please go through, have a look at this example code and how to parse your stuff into our format, and it pukes it out into our format. And
okay, I see.
It's like a gateway drug to get onto the OCP diag.
I know what you're talking about. No, I was talking about the former. So the first case where they are willing to share the OCP output, but not the code. The second one definitely crossed my mind in that space of facilitating the conversion, but I see that as a, I think that's a separate discussion.
So I'll add a short bit that there is a slight translation factor that may be needed there, because if you don't want to share the diag, it may also be reasonable to say that you don't want to share particular bits of the outputs. Like, I don't know what that would be, name of the hardware or some things, right? So you do need like a translator filter, maybe in some cases, to do that.
There's definitely value in that second one, second use case, Marcos, you're talking about for obfuscating some sensitive data. It's very valid, but I was taking the simpler of the examples first, which is how do we get engagement in leveraging the value of an output first, so that we invite contribution and visibility. Does that still resonate for what you were thinking, Marcos, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I have a quick question here. So maybe I misunderstood initially. So are we looking at the diagnostic tools which are not shared, like even the executable? It's not shared with us. It's just like a FA report is being shared in their proprietary output format, which may not be, it's not consumable in our internal pipeline. So we're just asking them, like, go ahead and run your analysis, but give us the output in a specified format. Is okay. I see.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, the question on my mind is, okay, we're an industry forum, right? It's an OCP industry forum. The vendors, the partners are on board. They're running a validation or a diagnostic. The question to me is, rather than them thinking, I'm doing this to work with company X, how do we shift the mindset to be like, hey, there's this is actually a forum across industry. They will share this output of this run with the community, not with vendor X to get just their business. And I know Marcos has raised, I think we all can see that there is obviously a business value proposition that's challenging here, but there would be great success if we're able to shift the paradigm very similar to those security vulnerability databases, right? Where somebody is incentivized to contribute back, because, you know, I think a Meta would like to see if a vendor had identified something for another company and vice versa, right? Like, I think we all benefit from a hardware perspective to know what errors were found.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was looking more at, sorry, so finish your thoughts.
Sorry, go ahead, Satish.
Yeah, so I was initial, my understanding was like, so if I approach a vendor, say like I'm working with the PCI switch vendor and they have a PCI switch tool, which they provide us the executable. Like we can run it and we can look at the output and things. It's just that the output is not in a consumable format. So I have to write a parser to consume that output. So I was thinking that if I ask the vendor, hey, you are the component vendor, can you give us your diag, which produces a certain output format, so that I can just consume it right away. I don't have to work through the like CSV parsing or something like that. That was my initial understanding.
Well, we absolutely want to do that. We absolutely want to do that. That is very much the nudge and the ask of the vendor, right? In some cases, it's pretty sensitive and it involves engineering work, but the incentive here is to onboard as many of those vendors into this format, because the integration is substantially easier for us. That is the entire proposition. So absolutely, Satish, that is the P0 here for OCP TV for sure.
That sounds good.
Okay, cool. That was good discussion. We should continue it at some point. Maybe it would be useful to get someone from a representative from vendors to have an opinion on this as well. In the meantime, we are at time, so thanks for joining today, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Well, bye.
See ya.